In today's video, I want to talk about the decision to have children. It's a choice I made 3 times in my life, starting way back in 1988. So I have some real life perspective on the short and long term consequences of such a decision. Of course, that means one thing I don't have experience with is not having children. It's important to remember that anyone you listen to on this topic will only ever have truly understood one side of the issue or the other. This question of whether or not to procreate is unique because it's a completely binary proposition. There is no having your cake and eating it too with this one, like you get with so many other big life decisions. You can move to another country and then decide to move back home. You can start one career and then transition to another. And of course, there's marriage and then there's divorce. But once you're a parent, that fact will never change. Even in the sad case of total estrangement, the power of that connection never ceases to exist. I believe it's the most important, most consequential decision you will ever make. Anyway, my goal is not to scare you or to pressure you, but just to talk through the issues in a fairly objective way. I've decided to do this by looking at the 5 most common objections to becoming a parent. You're probably familiar with each one of them because they're actually pretty obvious. 1, raising a child is too expensive. 2, I want the freedom to focus on career and other goals. 3, I haven't found the right partner. 4, the future is too uncertain. Or 5, I have no desire to have kids. Now, what I don't want to do is shoot down each objection. I want to avoid turning this into a mini back and forth debate and just calmly examine the pros and cons. I definitely will not try to talk you into one side or the other. I just want to let the perspectives speak for themselves. At the end of this video, however, I want to try to put into words my own weird, complicated feelings about choosing to become a parent. To skip to the chase, I'm so glad I did it. But whenever I try to describe why, I generally tie myself up in vaguely mystical knots. So let's see how I do this time.
I have to go back.
So let me try to walk through what I think are the 5 most common reasons people give for not having children and the counterpoints. I want to do this in a way that's fair to both sides because these are not trivial concerns. In most cases, they're based on very real trade-offs. The first one you hear all the time is raising a child is too expensive. And this is probably the easiest argument to sympathize with because it's not hypothetical. The numbers are real. If you take a conservative view, raising a child to the age of 18 can easily run into hundreds of thousands of dollars of costs. That's housing, food, clothing, activities, transportation, just the basics of keeping another human being alive and functioning in a modern society. And that doesn't even include post-secondary education, which is a completely separate conversation given how wildly those costs can vary. So when someone says they can't afford children, I take that seriously, especially if they feel like they're barely keeping things together as it is. The counter-argument, though, and you'll hear this from almost every parent, is that the financial burden rarely plays out the way you imagine it will. People adjust, lifestyles compress or expand, priorities shift. I could probably say that my own children were born before I was truly ready for their arrival financially. The real tension here is between certainty and adaptability. You want the numbers to make sense in advance, but in most cases, the responsibility of having a new mouth to feed imposes better financial discipline on a couple. The child becomes self-funding, so to speak. The second argument is, I haven't found the right partner. And again, I think this is completely legitimate. If anything, people probably underestimate how consequential that decision is. Building a life, and especially raising a child, with the wrong person can be incredibly difficult. You're not just dealing with your own limitations anymore, you're also dealing with somebody else's. And those two sets of limitations can amplify each other in the worst kind of way. So the hesitation here makes sense. If you've had a bad relationship or watched one up close, the idea of tying yourself permanently to another person as co-parent can feel like a really irresponsible risk. The counterpoint, though, is that waiting for the right person can quietly turn into waiting for a perfect person, which of course doesn't exist. And there's also a timing element that people don't like to talk about. The longer you wait, the narrower your window becomes biologically and practically. And that's men as well as women, by the way. So you end up in this difficult position where you're trying to optimize for something that can't be optimized, human compatibility, under conditions that are slowly becoming less and less flexible. It's not obvious what the right move is there. It's more like choosing which set of risks you're willing to live with. The third argument is the world is too uncertain to bring a child into. And depending on when you ask that question, it can feel like the most rational objection of all five. You can point to climate change, political instability, economic volatility, take your pick. It's 100% true that there have been moments in history where looking back, you might say, that would have been a bad time to bring a child into the world. But then again, when you look at history more broadly, it's hard to find a time that wasn't uncertain. World wars, depressions, pandemics, human beings have been navigating instability for as long as we've been around. And yet, people kept having children, not because they were naive necessarily, but because uncertainty is kind of the default condition. So the counter argument here is less about dismissing the concern and more about reframing it. If you wait for a stable, predictable world before making major life decisions, you may end up waiting indefinitely. The paradox is that children are often seen as a vulnerability in an uncertain world, but they can also become a source of meaning that makes uncertainty more tolerable. The fourth argument is I want freedom and career first before I have a child. And I think this one is often misunderstood as selfish or hedonistic. But when you really listen to people, what they're usually saying is that they want to fully explore their own potential before taking on a responsibility that will inevitably constrain their time and energy. They want to build something, experience things, figure out who they are. And you know what? That's not unreasonable. Children do change the structure of your life in a very real way. There are things you simply can't do or can't do as easily once you have them. The counter argument, though, is that freedom is a bit of a moving target. You can spend your entire life protecting it only to realize that you've also limited the kinds of experiences that give life depth and meaning. It's probably better to think of children not as a constraint, but as a reorientation. Your time is no longer entirely your own, but what you do with it can feel more meaningful. So again, it's not freedom versus no freedom, it's one kind of freedom versus another. And then there's the fifth objection. I just don't want kids. I have to say, this is the one that strikes me as the most honest position of all. No high-minded practical or moral justifications, just a simple lack of desire. In other words, the person doesn't feel drawn to the experience itself. And that's a difficult thing to challenge because desire doesn't respond well to logic. At the same time, the counter-argument you'll hear is that desire isn't always fixed. There are plenty of people who didn't want children at one stage of their life and changed their minds later, sometimes quite dramatically. And there are others who never did, it's fair to say. So this becomes less a debate and more of a question of self-awareness. Is this a stable preference or something that might evolve over time? I knew from the age of 8 that I wanted to have children, and that never changed. But I know not everyone grows up with that certainty in either direction. Okay, as I mentioned at the outset, I want to try to capture in words why I'm glad I had children. In doing so, I'm not going to address the things that make my individual children, Cameron and John Logan and Lucy, hi guys, the things that make them amazing, because you're not going to have my kids. I just want to stick with motivations that could be meaningful to you just as much as they've been meaningful to me. As I mentioned, these 5 reasons are somewhat obscure or even weird, and I'm pretty sure you've never encountered them before anywhere else. Okay, number 1. I'm glad I had children because I wanted to participate in an experience that would connect me to all the humans who came before me and even all the members of the animal kingdom. If life is a show, which it isn't, but it kind of is, I would have felt I missed out on a big part, maybe the biggest part of the show, if I never had children. Number 2, if I never had children, I would have been consumed by a powerful mixture of curiosity and regret about these complex individuals who never got a chance to exist. They would have been kind of like me, but also kind of not like me. I can tell you with absolute certainty that these fictional beings would have haunted my dreams. Number 3, raising children is the most complex and confounding challenge you will ever take on. If you believe, like I do, that life is partly about testing yourself and finding out what you're capable of, there is nothing that compares to raising a child. A big part of that has to do, of course, with the 18-year time commitment. What else do we do that takes so long? But at other times, the challenge is very immediate. I remember taking my oldest to an all-day music festival once when he was 6 years old. When the concert ended, he was dead asleep after a day outdoors and could not be roused. I had to carry him, as well as our bag, back to the car, which was probably 2 kilometers away. After 200 meters, I thought I was going to collapse in tears. but I still had 9 times that distance to go. Getting him to the car wasn't exactly a heroic achievement, but it was a nice metaphor for the kind of challenge that child rearing brings, kind of in the what doesn't kill you makes you stronger mode. Number 4, by having at least one child, you will get to re experience through them the earliest parts of your life, the parts that you cannot remember for yourself. Actually, not just the earliest parts, but probably all the parts. Just as learning a new language helps you understand your own mother tongue better, watching another human being grow before your eyes will help you understand yourself and your own development better. And finally, number 5, there is healing in having a sort of do over, addressing the mistakes your parents made in raising you. Or if not exactly mistakes, at least the things you wish were different. Of course, you will then make your own mistakes, ensuring that your kids will have the same healing opportunity that you did. But in a way I don't fully understand, I would say having a child allows you to reparent yourself. Okay, thanks for letting me walk through this issue with you. My hope is that in saying a lot of things, somewhere along the line, I said the one thing that you actually needed to hear on this topic. If you found anything I had to say useful, please consider liking and subscribing. It will do nothing important for you, actually, to be honest, but it would be mildly helpful for me. Bye for now.